So my name is Ellen Lewis, and I am one of the directors, there's two of us, of Ethos of Engagement Consulting. And we're going to talk today about inclusive stakeholder engagement, but particular within a context of inclusive systemic evaluation / inclusive systemic thinking. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And so the small consulting firm that I run with Ann Stevens, Dr. Ann Stevens, who lives in Australia. And I currently live in Portugal. So we're systems thinking consultants. We're co-directors of this small firm. And we're co-authors of a UN Women Guide, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, and you can get access to online, and the link is in the PowerPoint. So the way that we do our work, I'm doing a kind of combination between presentation of content and also just telling you how we do our work, because there might be some practitioners in there for that would be interested in how we do our work. So the company is actually just the two of us, myself and Ann, and anybody else that we work with, we call as ecosystem of consultants. We bring on when we have projects or they find projects that they want to apply for, and we apply together. We primarily focus on using systems thinking and transdisciplinary methodologies. We prioritize and advancing women and girls and gender equality and gender equity and other marginalized voices, human and non-human, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And then so let's say we see an opportunity to apply for a contract and it needs a conservation wildlife biologist on it, then we would go to our network and try and find the right person that has the time, the energy, the interest to work with us, and we would apply together. So we would design the proposal for the job and submit it together and then work together. We were activists in slowing the urgent state of both humans and nature, and we're values-based. And that link below, we have a website that you can go look at. So the type of services that we do, just so you can see the breadth of what we do, is we do monitoring and evaluation a lot. And that is doing monitoring and evaluation primarily through contracts with governments in the global north. So let's say the UK government has been running a literacy program in Colombia for 5 years, and they want to know what the impact has been and what the stakeholders who were involved with it and delivered it think about the program. And so there's a whole sector of monitoring and evaluation folks that go out and conduct these evaluations. We also do social research. So if if Australia wanted to do a new program in a country, but they didn't know what had happened before, so they might put out a contract for doing research to find out what's been done before, what is the numbers that they're working with. So basically a baseline in research and development. And then we do training and capacity development, and we do that online and we do that face-to-face. And then currently I am working as an organization development consultant with the UK apprenticeship system that has just rolled out in the last 2 years level 7 apprenticeship program in systems thinking practitioner. And so different universities and different providers are offering this level 7 systems thinking, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So most of you, I would think, or maybe not, I wasn't sure, know what systems thinking is. It's an approach. It's been around for about 50 years, 50 plus years, for analyzing multifactorial interventions. It focuses on complex and dynamic and interconnected relationships. A big part of what we do is we examine boundaries, meaning what's in and what's out, and who decided that and who gets to decide that, and what are we going to evaluate or what are we going to include in the intervention, and using systems thinking. And our ultimate aim is, as practitioners, is to drive systemic change through intervention, but not us drive it. We support local communities and local members, local stakeholders, to decide what is the things that they want to work with and what are the things that they want to change. So there's limitations, as one can imagine with any field. Oops, So it doesn't, for us, systems thinking doesn't inherently address social inequalities and injustices. It really doesn't. The response to inclusion and ecological balance is a really slow process. As you know, if you look just at the news, you can watch the impact of climate change, the impact of wars, the impact of gender equality or equity. It's just very slow. So part of the work that we do is to understand the complexities and the intersections and inclusions, which are often siloed. So if we're doing, often when we find a contract, it'll just talk about gender equality, or it'll talk about environmental protection, but it won't necessarily talk about the impact of climate change on the gendered impact of climate change. So that is where we come in around using our methodology, our approach. So that brings us to inclusive systemic thinking, which is our work. And so it evolved from a UN Women Guide, which the link that is down here below, which you can have access to, that we got hired to write to help the UN evaluation sector, or the evaluation global sector, respond to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll introduce those in a little bit. It's transdisciplinary, so that means that we go across research sectors, and we try and look at the intersections of them in the middle. We really consider positionality. So what are our privileged, where do we come from as individuals? Where does everybody else come from? So we try and think about what is our position within the system that we're intervening in, or running an evaluation in. We're looking at intersectionality, and that's where you look at the different societal groups of people that society has created. So culture, gender, religion, all these constructs that have been created by society. There's an intersection of them, and we all have them, right? Each one of these bubbles, we all have a version of those bubbles and more in our lives, depending on the day, on what we're doing for work, or all kind of what we're studying. And then we are very interested in shifting the knowledge and using the local knowledge of the groups that we work with, and prioritizing that knowledge so that we can better understand what is actually happening in the context that we're working in. So like I said, it's aligned with the 2030 agenda, but can you believe it? 2030 is like almost here. Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. So you might have seen this traditional diagram of the UN goals. There's 17 of them. And this is another way to look at them. This is another chart that we borrowed from an author, and I did put his name there, Costanza. So if you think about it, this just helps us think about, these are the 17 goals at the bottom squares. And if you think how they're interconnected, so if the overarching goal is for prosperous, high quality of life that is equitably shared and sustainable, then we might look at a project that says that its goal is to promote inclusive economic prosperity. So it could be an economic development project, and that would be under goal 8. But then when you're looking at that, if you're saying it's an inclusive economic prosperity, then you're going to want to ensure that it's equitable quality for education for all, so that everybody has a right to have education to achieve those goals. So then you would have to also consider gender equality and gender equity. So we're constantly looking across the Sustainable Development Goals and see how they're interrelated, so that we stop looking at things in silos. For example, if I gave you an example of if we were evaluating a graduation from high school program in Cambodia, we wouldn't want to just look at number of girls that started and number of boys that started. We would also want to look at whether it's high school. If we're looking specifically like at high school girl graduation, then we're going to want to know what's the access to clean water and sanitation, because girls of that age are menstruating. So having access to clean water and sanitation is going to impact all these other SDGs that you see circled. So that's part of what we talk about, is like, let's try and understand how these intersections impact each other, and how do we adapt the intervention or the evaluation to respond to that complexity. So our work lives in the critical systems thinking world, which looks at relationships. It looks at perspectives, the varied perspectives. It looks at the boundaries. So what's in, what's out, who's included, excluded from the analysis, and who decided that. So we are constantly looking at these bubbles to try and get a better understanding of the context. And it's not us that's doing the analysis. We're doing this in deep partnership with wherever the project is happening. So here's what we call the GEMS framework. So this is part of inclusive systemic thinking. We prioritize unapologetically to look through the lenses, we call these lenses, of gender equality and equity, and that means men and women, and a non-binary definition of men and women. So the people get to decide what gender identity they want to be or choose to be within the intervention. We talk about environments, and it has an S, and so that's natural environment. So that can be a forest, a river. Social environment, it could be a culture, it could be it could be a language. What's the environment that this intervention is happening in? So what is the context? Is the context organizational? Is the context post-conflict setting? Is it after a humanitarian crisis? Really understanding where the intervention is embedded in. And then marginalized voices, and this is where the human and non-human voices come in. So addressing both the social and ecological marginalization of voices. So for example, if the project the project and the stakeholders have decided that they might want to divert the river, a part of the river, to get the water closer to the village, so that women and children don't have to walk so far to get water, then who's representing the river for future generations? And it doesn't have to be a biologist. It could be a local elder. It could be a teenager. It could be whoever the group decides that should be the right person to represent those non-human voices, so that we make sure that we're thinking beyond the immediacy of the intervention. So let's just do a quick kind of discussion, so everybody can just chime in. So if we're doing a GEMS analysis, which is those three we just looked at, gender equality and equity, environments, and marginalized voices, what are the systems you think you see in this picture? What are the parts of the system? Anybody can chime in.
There's the tree.
Yep. What else?
The source of the water?
Yep, source of the water, right?
So I guess,
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I guess water and tree, grass, that's all environment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or the natural environment, yeah.
Right, so we have, so what are the parts of the system? You mentioned the water, so that's not something we can see, but we want to consider it, right? Because we know that that's what's happening in this picture, is that they're getting water for food security to survive.
Tree is a system.
Say that again?
I said one of the systems that you can identify is the tree.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, good.
So you have seen that. So
what about the women walking up and down?
Yep, exactly. So here are some of the gender ones. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
There are people talking. That's another identifiable system.
Yep.
In fact, the grass is a system.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, I stopped now. I don't want to contribute anymore at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. So you're right. You were all right, right? So the group of men is a system. The women are a system. The child is a system. The water, where the water's coming from. So you have to think beyond there, and those circles this is like setting boundaries. This is what, when I'm talking about boundary critique, this is what we do. So we have to think about beyond the
But
natural
they don't
ways
seem
we
to be
work.
related.
Sorry?
They don't seem to be related unless there is some transdisciplinary relation that can be observed.
Exactly. Exactly. And those are the lenses that we look through. We want to see, it could be that we set it aside and say, or the group set it aside and said, no, that doesn't, that the tree is not relevant to this particular discussion. But we look through those the GEMS lenses as a priority to identify, is there anything else that we have missed or not seen? So let's talk a little bit about what does that look like for stakeholder engagement? When I say that we work with the stakeholders, we believe, or at least I believe, I can speak for myself, that the inclusive systemic thinking is a practitioner approach, and it's a way of being. It's not just an approach. It's really how you think, how you prioritize, what you make time for as a practitioner. So we encourage curiosity and inclusivity. We work really hard with reimagining what a partnership looks like and strategies for systemic change. And we look for other ways of knowing. And what that means is that historically, most of my work, as you may have assessed, is in the global South. We get funded by the global North to do evaluations and research in the global South. But I'm also doing current work in the UK government area, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But we want to acknowledge that there are other ways of knowing other than the global North definition of what is knowledge. So we look for that, other ways of making decisions. We recognize artistic, indigenous, and local knowledge. We build mutual capacity development. So we want to learn as well as share capacity. We want to also build capability. And we want to learn as well as them learn from us, because everybody has knowledge. There's so much knowledge in any intervention. And so it's that mutual learning and power balance within the stakeholder groups. But we also want to make sure that whatever intervention is happening, that we're not adding to the local burden of the work that already is there. So if this project is only 2 years and we set up all the project itself has all these goals, and then the money is ends, does that leave the local economy carrying a new local burden that wouldn't have been theirs to begin with if the project hadn't come? So it's those kinds of deep complexity questions that we ask ourselves. So we think of ourselves as a thought partner. And that means that we have to be really self-aware of our own stuff, reflective, and admit that we don't know what we don't know. There's a lot we don't know, and we don't intend to reflect that we know everything. We're not experts. We're just skilled in certain areas. We are focused on increasing human rights and cultural competencies. We remain flexible and adaptable. And I know I have a few friends that flexibility in a project, or at least in evaluations, is not something they feel comfortable with. So it's really this approach that's the inclusive systemic thinking is not necessarily for everyone. The other considerations we have are power and ethics and the overall arching of doing no harm. We don't want to make things worse. So we're constantly looking for and asking, what might be the formal, informal power, who's being how objective is one being, and the capacity to be neutral is really not a capacity that is, I believe, everybody has a bias. We all have biases. We all have prior experiences, prior knowledge, different upbringings. So it's really up to us to really reflect on, can we facilitate fairly if we have a certain bias, and if not, what do we do about that? And again, what are the other ways of knowing? So I just want to show you this list. This is the list of tools that are available in Word format and PDF online at this link that are tools for evaluation, but they take you through I'm going to show you some of the tools, but these are available for you to adapt and edit, and we hope that you would use them in your own interventions as you see fit. And so here's an example of one of those tools. So for stakeholder analysis, these are suggested questions. These are just to encourage you to think, not to go through it methodologically and answer all of these questions. It's really about having you be reflective about, oh yeah, let's ask that question. That would work. Oh, let's not ask that question. That's not important for this group. So we really do a pretty in-depth stakeholder analysis. And then we also have a tool 3, which is a second, we call a second order boundary analysis. So we then go a little bit deeper and focus on the GEMs. So gender equality in the environments, is the evaluation, increased accountability on the learning about the habitability of environments or not? How will the evaluation be used to improve intervention design to promote sustainability in the future? So it's those types of questions that we adapt for every single project we do. And then as part of that, so as you can imagine, there's some countries that you would not want to go into and talk about LGBTQ identities, because that's not part of their culture, and it might put the people that identify as such at risk. So we constantly are, with every intervention we do, whether it's evaluation or research, we do a vulnerability assessment. So if we involve that population, even though they are part of the marginalized population, are we putting them at risk? And so how do we know that? And how do we do that? Are there other ways to get the data from them without putting them at risk? So we have a big ethics conversation whenever we go into and use an intervention. So here's just a sample of how we take the GEMs. So the GEMs, the gender equality, environments, and marginalized voices, there's many ways to embed it in any of your work, or at least the way that we do it. So the top one is for an evaluation framework. So the evaluation objective, you'll see column 1, that's set by the client. The client gave us that question. They want to know that answer. They want to have the indicators. And then the next one is OECD, which is a type of criteria that is used. So the first 3 things, the first 2 are given to us by the client. The third one, key questions, is our development. We developed that with stakeholders about, okay, so how do we get to answer evaluation objective number 1? And then we write sub-questions. And then within those sub-questions is where we embed questions about the GEMs. And then as you see, there's 4 other columns, right? Program, team, entrepreneurs, partnerships, institutions. So these are different stakeholder groups that we were going to interview. So we adapt the questions depending on which group we're going to be working with. So we do one of these for every single evaluation that we do. And it's shaped by the client, which is usually a government entity. The other way to do it is to embed GEMs across objectives and make them cross-cutting themes. So you can choose to put peace building across all of them. It's like, how is peace building being supported by this? Like if it's a literacy program, how is literacy helping the peace building? How is the irrigation project helping peace building? So there's ways of taking some of these GEMs, identified GEMs, and making them cross-cutting themes. You also can include them in the GEMs in different ways. We always include it in our proposal for the contract. We create an acronym table for our document. They're woven just like the example I gave above. We put it into our reports. We include it in key findings analysis, and then in final reports. So there's many ways that we constantly use the GEMs to represent those dimensions. So just a quick couple of case studies. Here's the United Kingdom for the last 2 years, has launched a new master's level 7 systems thinking practitioner apprenticeship program. So there's probably I think 12 training providers that are offering this, like University of Exeter, University of Birmingham, Cranfield, JGA. So different providers are offering this apprenticeship program. And the bullets you see on the left are companies that those students work for. So they're taking the systems thinking practitioner knowledge and they're embedding it in their work life. So those are mostly public sector students that work in many different organizations, and they're mid-management. And so we work with them across training providers to help them figure out how to do systemic interventions. So here's another example. This is a Colombian project. It was a 2-year economic development project funded by the German government. Initially, we just looked at the gems. So there you see the gems, the leaves of the gems. We looked at gender, environment, and marginalized voices, and we could see intersections there. And then once we got further into interviewing people, we realized that there were subsystems that we needed to consider. So the social political subsystems, so it was in a post-conflict setting, economic subsystem. So these stakeholders that were part of this project came from different parts of Colombia. And so they all had different economic needs. And then the environmental subsystem, a lot of the projects that they were funding, that the German government was funding for economic development, were based in an environmental context, like the river. There was a fishery built, there was coffee growing, and things like that. So there was other layers that the GEMS helped us uncover and try and understand better. Here's another one. This one is one that was the same type of program, was funded by an Australian government, but it was delivered in 3 very different countries: Cambodia, Kenya, and Vanuatu. And there was gender responses alternative to climate change. And the goals were to help these remote populations be prepared for disaster. And mostly that was drought driven in Africa. But in Cambodia, it was floods. And in Vanuatu, it was tropical storms. So each one of these goals that were set out by the funder were rolled out differently in each country. And we did an evaluation in each country, and then we did a comparison across the countries. The most recent one we've just finished is working with ASEAN for the Commission for the Promotion Protection of the Rights of Women and Children. So ASEAN is like the European Union, but for Asia. So there's like 13 member countries. And they wanted a guidebook and a monitoring and evaluation system to help local stakeholders, including the police department, social services, mental health, trafficking shelters, to be more sensitive about victim-centered approaches to the trafficking of human beings. And so we hired local consultants that spoke each of the languages, and worked with them, and they ran the workshops and helped with the analysis. And ultimately we came up with this publication, which is is now just being rolled out. It's a brand new publication. So that's it. That's me. That's the work. Stop share.
Thanks, Ellen. That's really brilliant to see such that, as you say, the breadth of all the things that you're working on at the moment. Feel free, if people want to just come on and put their questions. There's a fairly small group of us at the moment. Alternatively, feel free to type questions in the chat, and we can read them out. So whatever you prefer, really. You've got a question to start with, as people are sort of thinking about their questions. You talk quite a lot about the work that you've done in the Global South, and I've got a little bit of experience of that as a former trustee of a charity that supported quite a lot of developing countries. And I think one of the things we struggle with enormously is that it's great to have that sort of mantra of do no harm, but it's really, really difficult when you look at even sort of simple things where, for example, there was a care home in, I think it was in India, this one, and they needed a stairlift putting in. So it was a care home that had been formed as a charity.
I have a question.
Yeah, so just in the middle of asking a question at the moment. I'll bring you on in just a tick, Janos, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't quite get that. It's my...
So so there's a charity working essentially to support a care home in India, and we essentially funded them with a stair lift, And the big problem is, of course, that you've then got to maintain that stair lift. So then you impose a maintenance burden. So yes, you've saved people trying to help sort of take elderly folk up literally on their hands and knees and all sorts of things. You don't have that problem anymore. But now you've got a maintenance problem. You've got a stair lift. You've got parts that have to be shipped in from other places. And so there's that kind of where do you draw the boundary of doing no harm? I mean, in the end, we considered, well, we're probably better off. We're better off just doing this and hope that the sort of the harm of an additional cost burden, etc., outweighs the harm to the residents of literally having to make their way up on their hands and knees. But it's a difficult one, and it was something that we did struggle with a lot. How can you? I mean, is there a better way of doing that, Ellen? Can you think of ways of? No,
Nope.
it's pretty hard,
Nope.
isn't it?
No, and the thing that there's no right answer, and the likelihood is that harm might be done. But the goal is to constantly reflect upon that, and when a suggestion is made about what the intervention is going to be, we ask the stakeholders, say, so if that happens, how would you, let's say it is that lift, how would you take care of that lift once the funding is gone? That has happened a lot with water pumps across Africa. They've put in water pumps in villages, and then the water pumps break pretty fast, and to repair them, there's no metal shops nearby. So it is a constant struggle, and that's why currently there's a big movement, thank gosh, to build local capacity to do their own work instead of bringing in global north people to actually do the work, is to build not only capacity. So capacity is like going in and giving a training. So you give a training on a certain topic. But if you build empowerment in a certain group and they're still stuck in a society that does not recognize them, then they don't have the capability to use this capacity development. So part of the new effort is not only capacity building, but capability building. So you're building the system to support the work, the new knowledge that is being learned. And so there is no good answer for that question, Martin, and it is an ongoing dilemma.
Absolutely, yeah. As you say, it's a challenging one, but the training and the ability to use that training, the capability, will be really critical. I'm just keen to bring Janos on, and then I'll come to Sharon in just a moment. Janos, do you want to come on and ask you a question? Sorry, I cut you off earlier on.
Janos, did you have a question?
I think you're muted at the moment, Janos.
Can we unmute him?
Oh, I can ask.
Oh, very good.
That's it.
Yeah. The only place you did system thinking was when you identified the system as a consisting of elements, and we were asked as to how we identify a system, and that was it as far as I can see, because I can't see any point in all these feverish activities that you seem to be engaged in. I mean, what guides you in all this? Because although you seem to be hinting at it, but you are not identifying the problem that you set out to solve. And that is the general problem with current system thinking, that people are engaged in all these remedies, but there is nothing, it's all guesswork. And these are all just words that are mass produced. So how to change this kind of feverish situation and make it much more sort of organized is admitting that what is universally applicable in the living sphere is problem solving. Now, to identify a problem, that will guide you, the system, if you can agree as to what the hell it is, which nobody wants to know except me. I agree,
Janos.
That will make make it into a theory that will guide you. But all these are just, to me, with all compliments that you are trying to do, is just words at the moment, as far as I can see. Thank you
So
very much.
Janos,
Sorry
the
about-
problem is it's not for me to decide what the question is. You know, it's not, it is my job to help facilitate what are the questions. Sure, the questions come from a client that's paying me to go evaluate something or to help support something, but there's not a question. There are multiple questions. And so the work is at once that working with the local stakeholders, which are not only you know, staff members that are working there, that are village people, that are part of an organization development like BBC. It's, you could go in with one question or one problem, as you say, but there's multiple problems and they're interrelated. And we can't just silo a problem. We can't just say, well, if we go deal with literacy, then that'll take care of gender equality and everybody will be literate, and then economic development will be impacted. It's as you stated, it's very complex. So you have to look at the multiple questions across the systems and see what you see working with local voices to help represent that, so that it's not our supposition that these are the problems.
It doesn't matter how many problems have. Problem solving, as I said, is universal in the living sphere. It's a question of identifying.
Right, that's what we do.
Analyzing the situation.
Right,
Making
I
a
agree.
story. Well, I'm sorry, I overstepped my limits.
No, you're fine. You're right. It is about identifying it, but it's not me, Ellen, the identifier. I'm the facilitator of trying to.
That is the problem.
It's not me identifying the problem. It's me helping to identify what their definition of the problem is. I can come in and say, yeah, gender equality needs to happen now. And that's not going to go really well in a lot of.
There you are, there you are. There is a problem. Whoever identified it, that makes no difference.
Well, if you want to fix patriarchy for the last 3,000 years, then I would want,
Shut up.
right, then I would want gender equality to happen for everybody, men and women. But it doesn't happen that way.
Thanks, Janos. I'm just keen to move on to Sharon. I know, sorry, Sharon, I've slightly nicked your question, but do you want to just come on and just ask?
You did. As I was writing it, I couldn't write fast enough. Yeah, I think it is that whole issue around not paying lip service to do no harm, but also recognising who your marginalised and disadvantaged people really are in the context. It's very easy to make assumptions about who you think those people are that don't have a voice and how they'll be impacted. And I think there's a huge responsibility and accountability in actually recognising that you don't have all of those answers, and that you actually need to be very nuanced in understanding and actually responding to who might be quite marginalised, who actually might have quite a big voice in the room, but effectively it is not being heard or is being managed into a certain way of thinking.
I agree. Yep.
So I thought you did that rather well in what you were saying, Ellen, really. That's what I was commenting on, really.
And, you know, as human beings, we just marginalize. We just do. I mean, I was doing a project in Guatemala, and the group that had been funded for the last 5 years to do economic development work, we were doing a workshop in their village. And they were all women. And then I saw these other women of the same age, of the same village, looking into the workshop, you know, through the windows. And I'm going, gosh, I wonder how they picked, I wonder how. So I asked the participants that we were working with, I said, how did people get selected to participate in the program? And the women said, well, we decided that the women decided that have children, that the women with children should have priority. So they marginalize within their own group, right? So even if this other person who doesn't have a child, they might have an elderly person they're taking care of. They might have a disabled sibling, but within that group, there's marginalization. So it's a constant reflection and question to ask ourselves and the people we work with, you know, what other voices do we need to consider?
Yeah, it's a continual struggle, isn't it, to find, you know, to make sure you've got the right group or as close to the right group as
And you
possible.
never will have all. It's because that's the beauty of systems thinking, because we're limited by being humans.
Absolutely. Annabelle, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the talk. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how asking the questions of people in themselves kind of influences how important people you're asking the questions think those things are. You know, because even in asking a question, it's a power, isn't it? And you know, she's asking me that means it must be important. That means I must say, yes, I am worried about that. Like, how do you kind of stop that influence just in, even though the questions are great, the fact that you're asking them is
Right, absolutely. It gives it priority, right? It gives it, absolutely. And that's part of the power dynamics reflection part. Because a lot of the evaluation, in fact, all of the evaluation projects that we get are post projects. So that means the project is wrapping up or transitioning into another type of project. So they want to know how it went. What we push back on currently in the evaluation sector, in the development sector in particular, is that evaluation needs to come in at the front end, so that the questions are co-designed by the participants, so that they decide, because there is a fear at the end of a project that if they say the wrong thing, the project's funding is going to get pulled, or if they say the wrong thing, or yeah, absolutely, there's that. And so we have to clarify this. Like, first of all, we don't have control over that. We will be giving input on it. But if there's any knowledge that we have about the duration, if the project's wrapping up or transitioning, then we're transparent about it. But no, you're right. The power dynamic is there and present and powerful and biased. And so we include that in our report. We say, you know, we write, you know, limitations and what's the limitations and constraints, I think is where we put it. And a big part of that is, and that's why there's a big effort to build local capacity of people within every country because of the Sustainable Development Goals to do their own evaluation. So a big gap is that the development sector for the last 50 years has brought in people from the global north to do the work. And then they go away and they take that knowledge with them. So now there's a big shift, or a fairly big shift, because the World Bank is funding it, about building local capacity to do it. So there's whole groups of young emerging evaluators. And so there's a shift of that emphasis of building local capacity. And we're making a push for, we need to bring evaluation in as part of the design.
Yeah. Thanks, Ellen. That's a very good point, isn't it? And think about what you want to achieve, you know, up front. It goes back to Harmeyer's catechism, where he talks about looking at the evaluation and considering the evaluation steps as you go through as well. So yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? I think we've. Oh, hang on. So there's some more things I've put in the chat. Just to look for a few ticks. Anthony, do you want to come on and ask your question? Okay. So,
Is there a question in the chat I should look
there's
at?
a question. Yes, fine. There's a question in the chat. I think it's probably only come straight to me. Oh, hang on. That's odd. Let me just go and. Here we go. Just ask. I think Anthony's struggling to unmute, so I'll ask to unmute and see whether that. Has that worked? Anthony, can you talk? I think you're unmuted.
Anthony?
Oh, it's a bit odd. He says his microphone's blocked, and yet it's unmuted unless I can only see one Anthony.
He must be having mic problems.
I think there could be a bit of a mic issue, so I'll just read this out. It looks yeah. Sorry, Anthony. I'd like to bring you on, but yes, it may be a mic issue or a Zoom issue. But Anthony says, I recognise the strengths in Ellen's approach, and I'd like to ask how she locates potential clients sympathetic to her approach. I found a community-aware approach is a hard sell with potential clients focused on their everyday fires.
Yes, that's a good question, Anthony. So we are, we've come up with a phrase, we're diplomatically unapologetic about our methodology. And so when we apply for, so the jobs show up a lot of places. There's an evaluation network, there's DevX, which is a DEVEX, which is a place you can look for international jobs, short-term, long-term volunteer positions. So there's a whole network of where to look for these proposals that come out. They're called terms of reference. And they're constantly, you know, there's specialties that are needed for different ones. Some are economic ones, some are financial ones, some are environmental. So when we respond to one that we think meets our skills and the skills of some of our consulting network, then we write a proposal. That's what's required, is that you have to write a response to this term of reference, explaining how you would do the job. And so within that, we're very explicit. This is who we are. This is how we do it. This is what we're doing. This is our, you know, and so if they don't want to hire us, then they don't hire us and they'll screen us out beforehand. But we have been very successful in getting jobs, primarily because we're dealing with the complexity and the intersections of it, which we're still not good at particularly. I mean, we're good at it, but we're getting better. But you know, if you're gonna go back to the example of like diverting a river, if you're gonna divert the river and that'll keep women safer, it'll put the girls and boys in school so they don't have to spend the day getting water, then if you divert the river, that's a great solution for the village. But is that river going to be, how is that river going to be impacted for 30 years from now? So is there a discussion about, well, do you divert the river part of the year when it's raining and then set up other water gathering methods? So there's a conversation about trade-offs. I mean, that's the term I'm using now, and I don't like the term, but needs to be a conversation. It's like, okay, if we do make that decision, what's the consequences that we think might happen? We don't know for sure, right? Those are all assumptions. So it's a systemic theory of change that we are struggling with those intersections of the GEMS.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellen. Any other questions? Anyone else want to come on and ask anything?
Sure, Anthony. E-bike fires.
Sorry,
Okay.
is that a question, Ellen?
No, there's Anthony wrote in, it was a direct message to me. Sorry, Anthony. Oops. Yes, happy to, you can send me an email and we can get together and have a chat.
It's a big topic, isn't it, at the moment, trying to make sure our e-bikes are as safe as possible, and particularly with these vast numbers of dodgy batteries that have made their way into the supply chain.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion in the UK about sort of not, particularly when student digs, not charging an e-bike anywhere on an exit, because what a lot of students do is they'll charge the bike up and then the thing will catch fire, but it's in the middle of the hallway, which is the fire exit. So it's it's a real
right.
it's a real issue. Not something what you need to get a good systems approach to, I think. Any other questions? Any last questions anyone wants to ask just before we close up today? I can just see you've put your email address in the chat. That's brilliant. Thanks, Ellen. So people can direct the questions to Ellen if they've got anything outside of this. Well, huge thanks, Ellen. Really, really interesting to see the approach that you take and to have seen some of the examples of the work that you've done. A massively important sort of area to sort of get into in terms of helping the global south to grow without risk of putting doing things which will actually have negative consequences on it later on. So awesome.
And I'm really excited about what the UK is doing. I know that I love the UK. I lived there. I did my doctorate in Hull, the University of Hull. And the fact that the UK has embraced systems thinking and it's making its way through the public sector is very exciting. And the projects are just staggeringly great. And so it's really that's really well done, UK, because I think you guys are the only one that I know of, any country that is actually taking it and embedding systems thinking into the public sector in a way that, which is a lot of the complex problems is the social problems and the policy problems. So, and you guys are have a lot of them right now. So I have a lot of hope for the UK with all these practitioners applying it in their sectors.
It is. It's amazing, isn't it? We're so lucky to have the apprenticeship, to have the various routes into sort of the systems thinking, which is brilliant. So much more than there were when I started practicing systems thinking.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just so ever grateful. And yeah, go visit the website and stay in touch. I'm on LinkedIn. So
I've already tagged you.
there you go.
Love it. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Be well.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ellen.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Have a great
Karen
evening,
and
everyone.
Thanks.
Take care.
Cheers.
So much.
Bye. Bye.